The first time I stepped into that dimly lit church, the rain tapping softly against the stained glass windows, I wasn't sure if I was seeking forgiveness or simply someone to witness the weight of my secrets. Every step I took on the creaking wooden floor felt heavier than the last, like the echoes of my own guilt were following me, whispering the parts of me I had spent years hiding. I remember gripping the worn pew so tightly that my knuckles went white, feeling my heartbeat collide with the soft rhythm of dripping water outside. I thought I was prepared to confess, to lay it all bare, but nothing could have braced me for the words that would come back. Before we move on, I need to be honest with you. My heart sank when I saw that 99% of you watch my videos but don't subscribe. It truly means the world when you do. It helps stories like this find the people who need them. So please take a second to subscribe. And don't forget to tell me where you're watching from. I love seeing your locations. It reminds me that stories really do connect us, no matter where we are. If stories like this remind you how fragile love, trust, and human connection can be, subscribe, because every untold truth deserves to be heard. I remember the first time I noticed the silence. Not the comfortable kind, the one that wraps around you like a blanket at night, but the hollow, stretching kind that presses against your chest until it hurts. It wasn't a single moment, really. It was a series of small, almost invisible fractures. A missed glance, a laugh that didn't reach his eyes, the way his hand would linger a moment too long on the car door before letting go of mine. I tried to tell myself I was imagining things, that I was reading too much into the ordinary. But every evening, as I returned home from work, the quiet greeted me first, like a stranger waiting in my living room. I could hear the clock ticking in the other room, slow and deliberate, and I realized that each tick was echoing the truth I didn't want to face. At night, I would lie awake, staring at the ceiling, counting the seconds between our words, our touches, our silences. He would be next to me, asleep or pretending to be, and I would trace the outline of his face in the shadows, remembering the way it used to soften when he smiled, when he laughed. But now, even in the dim lamplight, the edges were sharp. There were secrets in those edges, and I could feel them cutting at the corners of my heart. I remember one night, the rain hammering against the window, drenching the city outside, and I whispered his name into the darkness, hoping it would pull him back to me, hoping he would answer, but only the steady rhythm of water answered. That night, I realized that love wasn't enough to bridge the gaps we'd made. Not alone, I began noticing the small things first. The phone that always seemed to buzz in his pocket when I was nearby. The way he would step into another room before answering a text, or brush off my questions with a shrug. I remember the way my stomach twisted the first time I caught him glancing at his phone, the light flickering across his face like a warning I was too stubborn to heed. I felt a flicker of suspicion, but I pushed it down, buried it beneath the rationalizations and reassurances I offered myself. Maybe it's work. Maybe it's nothing. But I knew, deep down, that nothing is ever nothing when it creeps quietly into the corners of your life. There were days when I would try to remember the beginning, the way our lives intertwined before shadows had fallen between us. I would go back to the small, vivid details, the way his hand fit perfectly in mine during late-night walks, the laughter that bubbled over at nothing, the quiet mornings when he brewed coffee just the way I liked it. Those memories became both a comfort and a torment, a reminder of the person I fell in love with and the one who had started to slip away without me noticing. I found myself scanning his expressions for signs, reading the tension in his jaw, the way he adjusted his watch or cleared his throat, tiny indicators of a distance I couldn't close with words. It was during one of these nights, when I had convinced myself I was simply overthinking, that I saw the first real fracture. He left the bedroom door slightly ajar, the hallway light spilling across the floorboards. I caught a glimpse of his phone screen, the glow revealing a name I didn't recognize, and a series of words that made the air in my lungs disappear. I don't think I realized I was holding my breath until I gasped, a sound too quiet to be heard over the rain. My hands shook, the cup of tea I had been clutching trembling like fragile glass. I wanted to look away, to pretend I hadn't seen it. But some part of me couldn't. I felt like I had been waiting for this moment without knowing it, that all the little silences and missteps had been leading me here, to the undeniable proof of everything I had feared. I sat there for hours after, the rain falling in relentless sheets, the world outside blurred by water and reflection. I didn't move, didn't speak, didn't even let my tears fall at first. I just watched, heart aching, as the image of him on the phone etched itself into my memory. And in that moment, I realized something else. I had known. I had known for weeks, maybe months, that the warmth in his eyes had changed, that the words we shared carried a distance I couldn't touch. But I had chosen to ignore it, to bury my intuition beneath hope and love, the desperate kind that convinces you to believe in miracles even when the evidence is clear. That night, I lay awake listening to the rain, feeling the weight of my own silence. I asked myself how I had missed it, how I had let the shadows grow without even noticing. I felt betrayed, yes, but also responsible, complicit in my own heartbreak. The house was quiet, but inside, my mind was a storm. Every memory of him, the hand holding mine, the laughter, the love, I could no longer separate from the shadow of betrayal that now stretched across them. And somewhere, in the middle of that storm, I understood something that would haunt me for weeks. Love could not shield me from the truth. Not anymore. By morning, the rain had stopped, leaving the streets outside damp and glimmering. But inside, nothing felt dry. Every step I took toward the kitchen, toward the day, toward him was heavy, measured, deliberate. I couldn't confront him, not yet, but I couldn't pretend either. And so I sat, heart thudding, tracing the outlines of a life that was slipping away, one shadow at a time. The silence between us had grown too loud, too sharp, and I knew that when the time came, nothing could undo the distance that had taken root. It started as a whisper, barely noticeable, like the brush of a moth's wing against skin. At first, I convinced myself it was nothing, just loneliness, the hollow echo of a heart-craving connection. But the more I tried to ignore it, the louder it became, until every glance, every smile from him carried an unspoken weight. He was everywhere I wasn't, and suddenly I noticed the spaces between us in ways I had never dared to see. I caught myself lingering on thoughts I had promised I wouldn't have, replaying moments in my mind with a mix of longing and shame, as if I were teetering on the edge of something I knew I shouldn't cross. I met him on Thursday. The city had just emerged from a week of relentless rain, and the streets still glimmered with puddles reflecting neon signs. He wasn't someone I was supposed to notice, not in that way. He was a stranger with kind eyes and a smile that felt like sunlight breaking through a clouded sky. We spoke briefly at first about nothing, about the mundane, the ordinary, the things that anchor you to the world. And then, slowly, imperceptibly, he became a rhythm I craved. My mind wandered to him in moments when it shouldn't, during meetings, during quiet dinners, while I pretended to laugh at jokes that didn't reach my heart. I tried to convince myself I was safe, that nothing could happen. But safety had become a concept I could no longer grasp. It was in the small, stolen moments that I first felt the danger. A brush of hands while passing a notebook. A lingering look that seemed to say everything I wasn't ready to hear. I remember one afternoon, standing in the shadowed corner of a bookstore, our fingers grazing as we reached for the same novel. The air between us shifted, thick and electric, and for the first time in months, my heart felt alive in a way that terrified me. I wanted to pull away, to retreat into the life I had promised myself I would protect, but my body refused. My mind wrestled with guilt, but my heart betrayed me, urging me forward with every beat. Every encounter left me trembling. At night, I would lie awake, replaying the way he laughed, the subtle tilt of his head, the warmth in his voice that seemed to seep into the hollow corners of my soul. I would ask myself, how did I let it come to this? How did I allow my own desire to grow when I knew it was wrong? And yet desire is a relentless force, not governed by morality or reason. It creeps in quietly, disguising itself as connection, as understanding, as relief from the emptiness. And once it has found its way into your veins, It is nearly impossible to ignore. There were nights when I would feel guilty enough to almost step back, to tell myself that this was a path I could not walk, that I had a life to protect, a person who loved me, even if that love was flawed, even if that love was fraying at the edges. But the pull was too strong. He became a secret garden in my mind, a place I visited when the world felt too heavy, when my heart longed for warmth I could no longer find at home. I told myself I was in control, that nothing would ever happen beyond the fleeting warmth of conversation and presence. Yet every glance lingered too long, every word carried hidden weight, and every small smile threatened to unravel me entirely. I began noticing patterns in my own behavior. I lingered in doorways longer than necessary, found excuses to cross paths, imagined scenarios that made my chest tighten and my thoughts scatter. I would replay conversations in my head late at night, dissecting every nuance, every syllable, every inflection. I knew the line I was approaching, the one I swore I would never cross. But the closer I got, the more blurred it became, as if desire itself had softened the edges of morality. It became a tightrope I walked in silence, teetering between what I knew was right and the craving I could not deny. Then came the night when everything changed. We were alone in a cafe long after closing, the smell of coffee lingering like a memory we had not yet shared. Outside, the streets were slick with rain, reflecting lights that danced across the windows like tiny, fragile promises. Our conversation drifted, intimate and charged with an energy I could not name. I remember his hand brushing mine across the table, a fleeting, electrifying touch that left my skin buzzing and my mind spinning. I wanted to pull away. I wanted to scream to myself to stop. But the part of me that had been starving for connection all these months urged me to stay, urged me to lean into the tension that had grown like a shadow between us. I left that night shaking, my pulse loud in my ears, every step home a struggle between exhilaration and self-loathing. I knew the line had been approached, maybe even crossed, in ways that mattered more than a moment could capture. And yet, even in the aftermath, the guilt was laced with a dangerous kind of hope, the hope that maybe, just maybe, the emptiness I felt at home could be filled with someone else's attention, someone else's understanding. It was a realization that terrified me more than any confrontation ever could, that my heart was betraying me long before my actions did, and that I was powerless to stop it. By the time I reached my apartment, the city had quieted, the neon lights dimmed, leaving the streets slick and silent. I sat by the window staring at my own reflection in the glass, tracing the lines of a face that had begun to fracture under the weight of desire and guilt. I asked myself how far I could go before there was no turning back, how many small betrayals I could endure before they became irreversible. And as I closed my eyes, I felt the first real tremor of fear. Not fear of being caught, but fear of what I was becoming, of the version of myself I had allowed to emerge in the shadows. The first time I realized the consequences of what I had let unfold, it wasn't loud or dramatic. There was no crash, no shout, no sudden exposure. It was quiet, insidious, like a stone dropped into still water, the ripples spreading slowly, impossibly, until they consumed everything I thought I knew. I remember standing in the kitchen, the morning light slicing across the floorboards, illuminating the crumbs of a life that had begun to crumble. I had hoped, somehow, that I could keep the truth buried, that my heart could carry the guilt alone. But the universe has a way of catching up, of turning whispers into roars when we least expect them. It began with a message, one innocuous enough to appear ordinary, but loaded with meaning I could no longer deny. The phone lit up on the counter and I froze. Every instinct told me to look away, to let it go, to pretend that life could continue as though nothing had happened. But my hands betrayed me. They shook as I picked up the device, my breath catching in my throat as I read the words. Each syllable was a hammer, each punctuation mark a strike to the fragile foundation I had built. It wasn't even intended for me, and yet, somehow, it felt like the universe had thrown me into a spotlight, forcing me to see myself with terrifying clarity. I remember the taste of air in my mouth, thick and metallic as I stumbled backward against the counter. My mind raced in 1,000 directions at once, each thought more desperate than the last. Could I confront him? Could I turn back time? Could I somehow erase the months I had spent teetering on the edge of betrayal? I realized in that moment that nothing could undo what had already begun. The fragile illusion of safety, of control, had shattered, leaving me exposed, trembling and unmoored. The confrontation came slowly, like a tide rolling in. I didn't know how to begin, how to find the words that could encapsulate months of secrecy, of longing, of guilt. When I finally spoke, it was a whisper, almost drowned by the silence that had stretched between us like a canyon. His face, usually so familiar, looked strange, unrecognizable in the weight of my confession. I watched his eyes narrow, then soften, then harden, each expression a shifting landscape I could no longer navigate. The love I had thought was unbreakable now felt fragile, like glass cracking under the weight of the truth. I tried to explain myself, to pour out every hidden moment, every fleeting temptation, every thought I had buried deep beneath hope and loyalty. But words failed me. They always do in moments like this. They sounded hollow, like echoes of guilt bouncing against walls that could not contain them. I saw the hurt reflected in his eyes, the betrayal mirrored in his clenched jaw, and I knew I had crossed a line from which there could be no return. And in that recognition, I felt something shatter inside me too. The naive, hopeful version of myself that had believed love could protect me from my own choices. From that day, everything changed. The world we had built together, once familiar and comforting, became alien and hostile. Rooms we had laughed in now carried the weight of accusation. Every glance, every touch, every word felt loaded with scrutiny and unspoken resentment. I walked through the house like a ghost, a specter of my former self, haunted by my own decisions. Sleep became elusive, replaced by the endless replaying of moments that had led us here, the what-ifs and why-nots that clawed at my mind in the dead of night. Even outside the house, life felt altered. The streets were the same, the air smelled the same, but I moved through it differently. Every encounter with friends, family, strangers felt tainted by the knowledge I carried. I could feel the weight of judgment, imagined or real, pressing down on my shoulders, and it made me smaller, quieter, more fragile than I had ever been. I caught myself withdrawing, avoiding conversations, avoiding reflection, as if pretending could somehow shield me from the consequences of what I had done. But pretending was a lie I could no longer afford. The most painful moments came in silence, in the spaces where confrontation wasn't needed, because the truth was already present in every unspoken glance. Eating breakfast in the kitchen, the clatter of dishes seemed amplified, every scrape of a spoon a drumbeat reminding me of what I had lost. Sitting on the couch, feeling the emptiness beside me where warmth once resided, I realized that betrayal isn't just a single act. It's a series of moments that erode trust until it is unrecognizable, until the love you once believed was solid crumbles into dust beneath your fingers. And yet, even in the midst of this destruction, I found myself reflecting, painfully, on the choices I had made. I saw the complexity of my own heart, the contradictions that had driven me toward temptation, and the ways I had failed both him and myself. I understood finally that falling is not always sudden, that it is often gradual, a slow accumulation of desire, neglect, and denial, until the moment comes when gravity takes hold and you can no longer resist. I saw my reflection in the broken pieces of our life, and I did not like who I had become. But I also knew that to look away would be the final betrayal, not just of him, but of myself. By nightfall, the house was quiet, as if holding its breath, waiting for the next wave of reckoning. I sat alone by the window, the city lights refracting on the glass, and I felt the weight of everything I had done. The fall was complete, but it had not yet ended. Consequences lingered, waiting, patient and relentless, and I realized that the hardest part was not the exposure itself, but the moments in between, those quiet hours where regret seeps in, where guilt settles in your chest, where you wonder if redemption is possible or if some lines, once crossed, can never be uncrossed. In the days after the fall, the world felt muted, as though color had been drained from everything I once loved. I walked through the rooms of our apartment, tracing the outlines of memories that now felt foreign, like stepping into someone else's life. The bed where we had whispered promises felt cold, the couch where we had collapsed laughing now rigid and uninviting. Silence had grown into a living thing, stretching its fingers through every corner, every shadow, and I could not escape it. I realized, with a clarity that made my chest ache, that the aftermath of betrayal is not loud. It is a quiet, gnawing presence, a weight that presses into your bones until you wonder if you will ever feel light again. I spent mornings staring out the window, watching the city come alive while I remained rooted in place, a witness to the life I could no longer touch. Rain became my companion, washing the streets and reflecting the broken fragments of my own reflection back to me. I noticed the little things that had once been ordinary, the smell of coffee, the way sunlight pooled on the floor, but they now carried a bittersweet weight, reminders of what was and what could never be again. Each day blurred into the next, a series of muted echoes, until I realized I was walking through the wreckage of my own choices, forced to confront the person I had become. He moved through the apartment with the same measured steps I had once taken for granted. Our interactions were careful, polite, like strangers forced into proximity. I caught myself watching him sometimes, studying the lines of his face, the way his hands rested on the kitchen counter, the subtle gestures that had once made my heart flutter. And every time I felt a pang, not just for the loss of trust, but for the love that had existed before betrayal's shadow fell. I understood that the heart does not simply forget, even when it has been wounded beyond recognition. It remembers, and it mourns. I began writing, trying to capture the chaos inside me, attempting to untangle the threads of guilt, desire, and regret that had knotted themselves around my soul. Words became my lifeline, a fragile way to navigate the wreckage. I wrote of my longing, my failures, the moments I had stolen from myself and from him. Each sentence was a confession, each paragraph a reckoning. And through writing, I began to understand that awakening is not instantaneous. It is a slow process, a painstaking peeling back of layers until the raw, unvarnished truth of yourself stands exposed. I saw the fragility of trust, the delicate way it can fracture under pressure, and I understood that it is not enough to recognize a mistake. You must also bear the weight of it, learn from it, and let it shape you into someone capable of facing the consequences with honesty. I confronted the parts of myself I had ignored, the desires I had justified, the selfishness I had buried beneath excuses. I felt anger, shame, sorrow, and unexpectedly, a flicker of compassion for him, for myself, for the tangled human heart that can love and hurt with equal intensity. Some nights, I wandered the empty streets, letting the cool air wash over me, feeling the city breathe around me while my own heartbeat thrummed like a warning. I remembered the person I had been before temptation, before betrayal, and I mourned that version of myself, not entirely, but enough to recognize what had been lost. And yet, even in mourning, I discovered a kind of resilience, a recognition that survival is not about erasing mistakes, but about acknowledging them, feeling them, and letting them inform the way forward. I reached out, cautiously, to rebuild, not our relationship, not yet, but my own sense of self. I began small, learning to trust my own judgments again, listening to the voice that had been drowned by desire and guilt. I sought forgiveness, not from him, not immediately, but from the part of me that had been complicit in my own unraveling. Each acknowledgement, each silent prayer, each honest reflection became a small spark in the darkness, a fragile light that hinted at the possibility of renewal. The most profound realization came in the quiet moments, alone with my thoughts, when I recognized that awakening is not redemption, and redemption is not guaranteed. What I could reclaim was understanding, clarity, and the hard-earned knowledge that the human heart is both fragile and unbreakable. capable of immense love and staggering mistakes. I learned that some losses cannot be undone, that some betrayals leave scars that never fully fade, but in those scars lies the potential for truth, for growth, for the kind of honesty that can guide you through the rest of your life. By the time I finally allowed myself to breathe fully again, the city had moved on. People laughed, cars roared, rain came and went. But I remained, altered, awake, aware of the weight I carried and the choices I had made. And in that awareness, I found a quiet strength, not the naive strength of invincibility, but the tempered strength of someone who has fallen, faced the consequences, and emerged with a heart that, though scarred, is capable of seeing clearly. I could not undo the past. I could not reclaim what was lost, but I could finally recognize myself. And in that recognition, I felt for the first time in months a fragile kind of peace.